Thank you very much, and I am thrilled to be here today and appreciate the invitation. And as was mentioned, I did have the honor of teaching at Louisiana College for 4 years, so I'm familiar with Camp Beauregard and the fine work that all of you do. And first of all, I want to thank you for your service to the state and to our nation. Thank you for all that you do to keep us safe and to protect and service. We appreciate it very, very much. My name is Scot Loyd. That's Scot Loyd. My parents were too poor for the other consonants. We could afford, we spent all of our money on vowels apparently. But originally I am from northeast Arkansas, the Mississippi River Delta, which is about an hour north of Memphis, Tennessee, right below the boot heel of Missouri, a little town called Gosnell, Arkansas. But now I'm serving at Oklahoma Baptist University in Shawnee, Oklahoma, about 30 miles east of Oklahoma City, where I'm privileged to teach communication studies and coach the award-winning Oklahoma Baptist University debate team. Now, if you're wondering what we actually do in debate, we teach people to persuade others from the community, and sometimes people get the wrong idea about collegiate debate. Sometimes if you've seen competitive debate, it may appear that they're in training to be an auctioneer. That's not our format of debate. What we do is we utilize all the forms of persuasion. So if you talk about logical arguments, if you talk about emotional driven arguments, and if you think about speaker credibility, that's what we do. And our young competitors get to go in and persuade people. They may be a college freshman that is judging their round, or it may be somebody's grandmother. So people from all walks of life, and you have to be able to conform your message to meet the demands of persuasion that judge has. And that is very applicable to what you do, because you are interacting with people from all ages. And we've had a little bit of success at Oklahoma Baptist University. Last year, our novice squad finished number 2 in the nation. When I was at Louisiana College, I was there for 4 years, and all 4 years, my teams finished in the top 5 nationally. And 2 of the last 2 years that I was there, we finished in the top 3. I had a little trouble with a struggling school here in the state of Louisiana, LSU. You might have heard of them. They were pretty good at debate. They're pretty good at football as well. So I couldn't beat them, but we did pretty well. And a lot of those skills that I teach are very applicable to what you do, because you are interacting with people from all ages, from all walks of life, and you face challenges because you are dealing with bureaucracies that are above you, and you're endeavoring to do a good job to lead those that are following below you. But here's what I want you to understand today, that no matter where you find yourself in the leadership structure, that you have the ability to be an influence to those that are around you. If we look at for the first time in American history, we have 5 generations that are working together, and you see the list, and these are the names that have been prescribed to certain groups, to certain generations. But in reality, what you probably discovered is that no matter where somebody falls in these particular generations, people are people. And even though I've never done what you do, and perhaps you've never done what I've done, here's one thing that I understand about leadership. Leadership is influence, and you have the ability to influence those that are around you. And no matter what is happening above you, you have the ability to impact and to influence those that you interact with on a daily basis. And what I've discovered is probably what you have discovered, is that we are more alike than we are different. So regardless of where you identify as far as a generation is concerned, all of us share common values. All of us share common desires and goals. And we want to become everything that we were destined and designed to be, and we want to help others to become that as well. Unfortunately, what we do a lot of the time is we end up pigeonholing people, right? We think of somebody from a particular perspective or a particular background. And the thing about pigeonhole is that word was originally derived from a pigeon coop, right? You had domesticated pigeons that people wanted to keep in the city, and so they designed this nice little comfortable nest with this little opening called a pigeonhole, and the pigeons were able to get in there and nest and have a good time and relax and make a home. But here's the problem with pigeonholes, right? Is that not all pigeons prefer the coop. Some pigeons prefer the park. And regardless of where you are in the generations or how you identify your background or your situation or your circumstance, none of us like to be pigeonholed because we are all different. We all have different desires. We all have different dreams. We all have different goals. And as leaders, you are privileged to be in a position where you can help people achieve those goals, achieve those dreams, and achieve those desires. How do we do this? Well, there is quite a bit of study and research that has been brought to bear on how cultures and societies develop. And one model of culture and society is known as the bounded model. And what the bounded model says is that there are clear structures, that there are hard and fast boundaries, and that we should define people and define communities and define cultures based upon those boundaries. And the nature of the beast when it comes to military organizations, right, is that you are dependent upon those structures. You are dependent to a large extent upon those hard and fast boundaries, because when you are in a position where you are serving or protecting our communities and our nation, right, you need to understand a clear structure of leadership, and you need to understand what is expected of you, and you need to respond almost without thinking. It needs to be automatic. So we understand the importance of those boundaries. We understand the importance of a bounded structure when it comes to leadership. But just listening to your session this morning, all of you uniquely understand that there are issues with the bounded leadership structure, right? Because bounded leadership structures create bureaucracies, and bureaucracies reduce people to pieces of paper, as has already been stated. And sometimes that can be difficult when you are dealing with the people that you're involved with in your particular circumstance or situation. So here's what I want to offer to you today. What if you saw what you are doing not as a bounded set of structures, but rather in your interactions with the people that you interact with every day, you have the wonderful privilege of interacting with them not from a bounded perspective, but from a centered perspective. Not from a bounded perspective, but from a centered perspective. Now, what do we mean by a centered perspective? Maybe this analogy will help you. When the United States was being settled and westward expansion was happening, cattle ranchers were very concerned about corralling their livestock. And so one of the innovations of the American West was the barbed-wired fence. And so when people were moving out west, it was very difficult to understand where one piece of property ended and another piece of property started. And how do they keep their cattle in certain geographical locations based upon the fact that the American West was so wide and the region was so vast. And so the American innovation to settle the West came in the answer of fences, barbed-wired fences, to keep cattle corralled, to make sure that they were in a particular place. And so as Americans, we love our fences. We love our walls. We love our boundaries. We love our structure and our organization. But here's the problem with fences, right? Is that in the American West, there was a lot of disputes that developed around boundaries. People would fight and kill each other over laying claim to particular parts of the land. And even if you take that analogy and step back from it and apply it to what's happening in the larger culture, today we see that people are fighting and there is great stress and unrest when you look at the boundaries that are drawn in our society. If you think about the border crisis, if you think about the divides between gender, between young and old, between black and white, between all of the areas that there is concern in our country, it happens where? Generally, it happens around the hard and fast boundaries that have been delivered to us by our culture. And that is the way that we look at leadership a lot of times, is that, well, I've got to lead according to the boundaries that have been given to me by culture. I've got to fall into these hard and fast, rigid structures. But I want to offer a different perspective. Because in other parts of the world, as the American West was being settled, in other parts of the world, it was cost prohibitive to put up fences. In particular, on the continent of Australia, with the outback, ranchers over there said, we can't put up fences. It's too wide, it's too big, it's too expansive. So what they did to corral their cattle is, instead of building a fence, they dug a well. And so the innovation was this: when the cattle get thirsty, they will always gravitate back towards the center of the life-giving source of water. And so the idea here, the analogy, illustrates a leadership structure, a cultural structure, a societal structure that says, you know what? Yes, I have to deal with all of these boundaries. I have to deal with all of these structures. I have to deal with all of the hard and fast boundaries of bureaucracy on one end, but in the way that I live my personal life, in my interactions with the personnel that are assigned to me, what if instead of reinforcing those boundaries, I became a resource, a center of life-giving water, to extend the analogy? In this case, it would be advice, it would be example, it would be the kind of person that is a resource for developing my life and becoming the kind of person that I want to be, and developing the kind of career that I want to develop. So what would this look like? What would a centered type communication look like in reality? Well, here's what I want to give to you today as kind of a takeaway. And a lot of this information isn't new to you. You probably heard it in different forms. But I tease my students that this is Loyd's laws of communication. So if you want to adapt that and repeat that, that'd be fine with me. Loyd's laws of communication, or if you prefer, a centered structure of communication. So how do you communicate from a centered perspective where you are endeavoring to become that life-giving source for those that you command, those that you lead, those that you influence? And if you haven't discovered this as of yet, I'll echo John Maxwell here, is a great leadership guy. Read any book that he has written and you will benefit from it. He says that leadership is not about title. Leadership is not about title, but leadership is about influence. And you probably experienced this, that there are people under your command that everybody keeps mentioning their name. Everybody keeps referring to them. And they may not have the particular title, or they may not have the particular classification, but they are a leader. And here's the real truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are all leaders when you define leadership as influence. You are influencing someone. You are influencing yourself, and then you are influencing those that are around you. And so when it comes to communication, clear communication, how do you do this? And the great thing about this model is that it applies to interpersonal communication, if it's just one person, or if it is written communication, or if you are communicating to a group of people. If you will do these 4 things and repeat these 4 things over and over and over again, you will distinguish yourself as a masterful communicator. So what do? In every communication, interpersonal, mass communication, written or oral communication, construct and concept, here's the 4 things that you do. The first thing that you do is start a fire. Start a fire. What does that simply mean? It simply means that you demand, command, gain the attention of your audience. You gain the attention of your audience. If you go to sleep on me today, guess what? It's not your fault. It's mine. As the speaker, as the guy on the stage, as the one that is communicating, I have a responsibility to keep you awake. And so if I notice that some of you are dozing, if I notice that some of you are sleeping, right? What do I need to do? I need to make a big movement. Hey, gain your attention. Look at me over here. Sometimes I'm tempted in class to carry a stick and to whack people over the head, but there are laws against that. So I have to be more creative, right, to keep people's attention. Gain your audience's attention. Charles Spurgeon, great pastor and theologian, used to tell his seminary students that if you want people to come out and hear you preach, take a can of kerosene, pour it over your head, strike a match, and people will come out just to watch you burn. Now, obviously, he didn't mean that literally, but what he did mean is that if you're going to talk about something, show us some passion. Show us some fire, right? And I'm a pastor and a preacher, so I may get into preaching mode. And if you want to shout amen, that's okay too, right? Because we feed off each other. And so if you get the audience to that particular perspective where they are buying into what you are saying, you are starting that fire and you are continually rekindling that fire as you move forward through your presentation. Now this happens in your interpersonal context as well. If you're talking to someone and you want them to listen to you, how do you start the conversation? A lot of times you might just ask a question. And asking a question is a great way to gain the audience's attention. For instance, if I ask you a question, how many of you have a dog? Show of hands. All right, so what I did there is I just asked a question, and whatever you were thinking about internally was interrupted, and immediately you started thinking about your dog. Others of you that don't have a dog, you're thinking, I should get a dog. Everybody seems to have a dog. Why don't I have a dog? Right? Right? Some of you, I do a little exercise with my students thinking about how words impact people, and I say the word dog, right? And immediately you think about a particular dog. Probably you're thinking about your dog. How many of you thought about a cute little foo-foo lap dog when I said that? Nobody wants to admit it? Thank you. I appreciate it, right? I got a cute little foo-foo dog. How many of you thought about a big, ferocious dog, right? All right. How many of you thought about a prairie dog? That'd be interesting people, right? How many of you thought about your ex-boyfriend? Girlfriend. Okay. All right. So the point, right, is that when I say the word dog, very simple way, I asked a question. How many of you have a dog? And then I piggybacked on that. I built on that, but I was able to get some audience interaction going there. I was able to gain your attention, keep your attention, to draw you back in to what we're talking about. So if you're just talking to one person, this works. If you're talking to a group of people, this works. If you're doing an email or you're writing something, this works, right? You always want to have something that gains your audience's attention And then from that moment, you want to move forward with building a bridge. Now, what do I mean by building a bridge? If you are speaking to someone, no matter the context, imagine that there is an invisible chasm between you and your audience. And you've got to bridge that chasm. So within that chasm, there's all kinds of distractions, right? Crocodiles, alligators, big bad things, right? Sharknadoes, whatever you want to put in that chasm that you want to avoid. Imagine somebody in a meeting one time said, I think we should make a movie about tornadoes and sharks and combine them. And they made a lot of them, right? So never hold back on those ideas, no matter how bad you might think they are, right? So you gotta bridge that gap. You gotta bridge that chasm. How do you do that? Well, smiling is a great way to bridge the gap. You know, pretend like you're in a toothpaste commercial and smile. The thing about smiling is that it puts people at ease, and it makes you feel at ease, even though you may not. You might be nervous, right? And anytime you're in front of people, anytime you're in a new communication context, you're going to experience communication apprehension. It's inevitable. It never goes away. The best we can do is learn to manage it, right? You're always going to have those butterflies in your stomach, but what you want to do is help those butterflies fly in formation. So build that bridge by smiling, making eye contact, tell them something about yourself that is relatable. And remember, you're not just doing this once, but you're continuing to do this across the relationship. And the great thing about your situation and circumstance is that you get to interact with people, and you get to build that bridge over time, which is a great thing to do, to build that relationship. The third thing you want to do is give an example. Everybody should have an example from their lives that you can share with others. And here's the thing, no one's entirely useless. You can always be a bad example. And sometimes the best example you can share is a failure from your life or a situation where you struggled. A bad example that helps them improve on what they want to become. Tell a story, and everyone has a story to tell. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So start a fire, build a bridge, give an example, and then the final thing you want to do is you want to encourage action. Tell your audience or tell that person that you're interacting with what it is you want them to do, what it is you want them to feel, or what it is you want them to think about the information that you have just shared. A lot of times we think about action as they've got to do something. In a lot of instances, we do want our audiences to do something. But sometimes the most important thing you can do for your audience is make them feel something. Make them feel differently about a particular topic. Make them think differently about a particular situation. So again, these four things, if you'll do them over and over and over again and repeat them, you will see the benefit of building that communication relationship with those that are around you. Centered communication. A lot of what I teach is persuasion, and in your line of work, you deal with persuasion a lot. You have to persuade a lot of people. So how do we define persuasion? Persuasion is the co-production of meaning that results when an individual or group of individuals uses language strategies and or other symbols such as images, music, sounds to make audiences identify with that individual or group. If we think about organizational culture as a river that is flowing, all of you as leaders are upstream from the people that you lead. And so what you want to do is, instead of just going along with the flow, right, because you're influenced by people that are upstream of you, instead of just going along with the flow, what you want to do is you want to learn how to get into the river and to put things in the river that will make a difference for those that are downstream from you. So sometimes you got to take a step back and you got to think about, okay, how is what I'm doing influencing those that are directly under me? And how am I being influenced by those that are directly above me? And I want to pull in items such as strategies. What language am I using? How am I talking to those that are around me? How am I communicating to those that are around me? What words am I choosing to employ to speak to those that are near me? Because that makes a difference in the culture. And are you relatable, right? Are there particular types of music or pop culture that is influencing your unit or those that are around you? Are you aware of this? Now, I hang out with younger people all the time, college students, so there's a lot, obviously, that I don't get because I'm an old guy. But I have to pay attention, and sometimes I'll drop a cultural reference that they understand and they can relate to, and this becomes harder and more difficult with every passing year, right? Because I'm just so out of touch. But what if you implemented that in the culture that you are living in and that you are interacting in on a daily basis? It enhances your ability to persuade those that are around you. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, all of us, no matter what your rank, no matter what your position, all of us are in the persuasion business. All of us are in the persuasion business. There is someone that you need to persuade. There is someone above you that you need to persuade. There is someone below you that you need to persuade. And if there's nobody in those categories that you need to persuade yourself, right? Because you have goals, you have dreams, you have aspirations. How do you keep that moving forward? All of us are in the persuasion business. And the greatest persuasion techniques come in the form of stories. And all of you have a story to tell. And so I want to encourage you, tell those stories to those that are around you. Because we can all relate to stories. What are the stories that shape your life? What are the stories of your family, of your church, of your community, of yourself? What are the stories that you struggled with? What are the stories that were formative in your life? Tell those stories to those that are around you and to those that you are leading, because that will impact them and it will serve to inspire, to encourage, and to help them become what they are intended to be and to meet their goals. So think about the stories that you're telling. What does your leadership communicate? What does your life communicate? Is it a persuasive story? There's a great communication scholar by the name of Ernest Borman, and he came up with this idea that's known as symbolic convergence theory. And symbolic convergence theory basically says that all of us, if you're a part of an organization, and communities and societies and cultures are built on organizations, all of those organizations have a foundation of storytelling. And he refers to this as a fantasy theme. And so if you think about the fact that as Americans we have certain fantasy themes that we all gather around, rugged individualism, that is a big construct for Americans. We believe in working hard. We believe in doing our best. We believe at being the best. And so what Ernest Borman says, that there are these sacred fires of rhetorical visions that are built through stories. And he describes this as a rhetorical vision is constructed from fantasy themes that chain out in face-to-face interacting groups, in speaker-audience transactions, in viewers of television broadcasts, in listeners to radio programs, and all the diverse settings for public and intimate communication in a given society. So that's academic talk for basically everything that we do is built around a story. You're a part of a great organization that has a long history and that has a central story. And what motivated you to join this organization was something within you resonated with the story of the National Guard. Something within you resonated with the values of defending and serving and protecting. There's something about you that is hardwired that when the story is told, you're like, yeah, that's my story, that's my tribe, And because of the unique nature of what you do, you have other stories, right, that inform your life, that inform your particular organization that you belong to outside of your military career. And all of that is built upon a story. So what is your story? And are you telling that story? And are you attracting others to the sacred fire of your particular rhetorical vision? Borman said that rhetorical innovation on occasion may begin when one creative person fantasizes a powerful consciousness and does so with such skill that his or her consciousness is shared by converts and becomes the rhetorical vision that forms a community's consciousness. So again, if you look at the leaders that I have up here, right? Dr. King, powerful leader. Think about the power of his rhetoric and his philosophy of nonviolent resistance that made such a difference and still continues to make a difference in our country. A lot of the principles that he picked up on he learned from Gandhi, right? And his nonviolent resistance. And then if you look at contemporary political leaders, as polarizing as they may be, what attracts people to them is built around a particular story. So they tell stories and it resonates with a particular constituency, it resonates with a particular tribe, a particular group, and they go, yeah, that's my guy, or yeah, that's my gal, and those are the people that are resonating with me right now. And if you look back, and if you analyze from an academic and perspective, the 2016 election, what you had is you had two very different people telling two very different stories that resonated with two very different groups of people. And politics aside, a lot of the analysts would agree that one of the problems that the Hillary Clinton campaign had in 2016 was that she did not tell an effective story. All right? So again, wonderful attributes, wonderful leader in a lot of aspects, but she stumbled at the end because her story did not resonate to the extent that President Trump's story resonated with his particular constituency. And so I ask you again, what story are you telling and how effective is that particular story? This is a great personal hero of mine. His name is William J. Seymour. I'll put my cards on the table. My particular religious heritage is Pentecostal. I know it makes no sense that I actually work for the Baptists, but we get along great and it's a wonderful thing. But William J. Seymour was a son of Louisiana slaves, grew up here in Louisiana, and began his spiritual journey. He left Louisiana and went north first to Indiana and then to Ohio. And then he came back down to Houston. And because of Jim Crow laws, he was forced to sit in the hallway of a Bible school that was opened by Charles Parham, who is recognized as the father of modern Pentecostalism. And he learned and adapted and embraced a lot of the aspects of Pentecostalism. And before he could finish the school, he accepted an invitation to pastor a small church in Los Angeles, California. And Pastor Seymour made his way out there. When he began to preach the particular Pentecostal message, he was asked to leave that church, and he opened up a prayer meeting down the street in the home of a friend on Bonnie Bray Street in Los Angeles, California in 1906. Well, that prayer meeting got really, really big and attracted people from all walks of life, black and white together, and they had to open a storefront community church at 312 Azusa Street, which became known as the Azusa Street Revival. And what was unique about Pastor Seymour is that here at the height of Jim Crow in America, right, 1906 to 1909, in Los Angeles, California, you have a black minister who is leading an integrated worship experience. Not only was it integrated along race and ethnicity, but it was integrated along class as well. There were rich and poor that came and worshiped together. And for 3 years, 7 days a week, 3 times a day, they had non-stop church. And the great thing about William Seymour, what made him such an effective leader, was that he didn't look to the hard and fast boundaries of theological debates that governed the conversation in 1906 to 1909. But what he said is, look, we're going to be centered on a particular experience, and we're going to be centered on the gospel of Christ, and I'm going to invite everybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your age, regardless of your socioeconomic status, you can come and worship, and you are accepted and you are embraced. And that's what makes him a personal hero of mine, that he was willing to tell his story and share it with others and to lead from that centered perspective. And here's the great thing, ladies and gentlemen. You and I can lead from a centered perspective as well. We have a story to tell that can resonate with people of all ages, of people from every socioeconomic class, and we can be a beacon of light in the midst of a divided culture if we choose to be centered. So how do we tell our story? And I'll go through this quickly. How do we tell our story? I'm about to ruin every movie, every book that you will ever read from this point forward. There are 6 elements of every story, and because I am a preacher, I have some nice alliteration to go along with it. There is a person with a problem who meets a prophet, who receives a prompt, who is given a promise, and then ends up with a promotion. Person, problem, prophet, prompt, promise, promotion. So a person has a problem, and that person with a problem meets a prophet. The prophet prompts the person with a problem. The prophet gives a promise to the person with a problem, acting on the prompt. The person overcomes the problem by acting on the prompt from the prophet, receiving the promise, and gaining a promotion. It reads like Dr. Seuss, doesn't it? Lots of P's in there. But think about your favorite movie. All right, for me, I love the Star Wars movies. I love the Star Wars mythos. And even if you aren't familiar with Star Wars, you probably know the story. Young farm boy, Luke Skywalker, he's got a problem, right? He's stuck on this tiny little planet, and he wants to fight the evil empire. How does he do it? He meets this prophet by the name of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who says, hey, Luke, I'm going to train you in the ways of the Force. He gives him a prompt that if you do what I'm telling you to do, you're going to achieve your dreams of leaving this tiny planet and becoming a rebel, part of the Rebel Alliance, and fighting the evil empire and defeating Darth Vader. And Luke obeys that prompt, goes with Obi-Wan Kenobi through a series of events. He is given a promise that if he does this, right, and so at the end of Star Wars A New Hope, he's flying towards the Death Star, and he hears Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice from beyond, use the Force, Luke. Prompt, promise, he does so. He fires his torpedoes, destroys the Death Star, and then at the end, he gets a medal, right? And suddenly, he is on his way to Jedi status because he obeyed the prophet, got the prompt, received the promise, and now he's getting the promotion. So you can probably think of all kinds of movies where this applies, right? So this is another example. You have Tony Stark helping the young Peter Parker, right? Well, who are you helping? Who are you guiding in your story? And as leaders, and I served as a pastor of a local congregation in Arkansas for 5.5 years, and here's where I got it wrong, guys. When I was standing on the stage and when I was delivering the sermon every Sunday, I thought of myself as the hero of the story. And sometimes, as leaders, we fall into that trap of casting ourselves as the hero of the story. If you're on a stage and you're a leader and you're the person in charge, you're not the hero. The people you are leading, they are the heroes. You are the prophet. You are the guide. You're Obi-Wan Kenobi coming alongside the Luke Skywalkers. You're Tony Stark coming alongside the young Peter Parkers. How are you telling that story? How are you influencing those that are around you? Are you making things easier or harder for those that you lead? Tell your story. Lead from a centered position, and by doing so, you will make a tremendous difference. So how do we do this? One of the big ways that you do this is you practice humility. Practice humility. And this is hard, right? Because as leaders, we all have egos, and you've got to have ego. You've got to have confidence. You've got to have a bit of that to be an effective leader. But I want to challenge you to practice humility. Intellectually humble people value truth over their egos. Need to be right. They are freed up from to admit the limits of their own knowledge. And it isn't indicative of a lack of confidence, but rather it means that they are submissive to the truth and that they are therefore capable of expanding their understanding of the world in a way arrogant people are incapable of doing. What are you learning from the people that you lead? And when you're in a position where you make a mistake, are you owning that mistake and saying, wow, I made a mistake here. Let me learn from this mistake and let's move forward together. How can I help you? How can you help me? I want to be humble about this. Yes, I have a title. Yes, I have a position. Yes, I am a leader. But if I want to leverage that leadership effectively, the way that I do that is not through arrogance, but through humility. And that is a part of being a centered leader. So staying centered in a bounded world involves three things. First of all, practice hospitality. Don't assume that others are hostile just because they are different. You're going to meet people from all different walks of life, from all different circumstances. Practice hospitality. Earlier this year in January, I was privileged to be a part of a cultural tour of the nation of Canada, and I was in the city of Toronto. And I was meeting with a group of people that were serving communities there, and one elderly couple served us dinner in their home. And I was, trying to be complimentary of the hospitality, and because I'm from Arkansas, everything is yes ma'am and no ma'am and thank you ma'am and this is great, this is so good. And at the end of our dinner, I said, thank you ma'am, I really appreciate the wonderful dinner you served. You certainly have the gift of hospitality. And I was taken aback at her response. She didn't miss a beat. She looked at me and said, it's not a gift, it's a command. It's not a gift, it's a command. She was speaking from her Christian perspective of the command that we have in Scripture to be hospitable to those that are around us. And sometimes you think, okay, in order to be a good leader, or in order to be a good example, I've got to have these gifts of charisma. I've got to have a dynamic personality. No. What you've got to have is an attitude that says, no matter what's happening above me or below me, I can choose to have a good attitude, and I can choose to be hospitable to those that are around me, even those that are very different from me, because I can learn something from everyone. So practice hospitality. Don't assume that others are hostile to you or to your leadership just because they are different. Secondly, cultivate community instead of mere affinity. Cultivate community instead of mere affinity. What do we mean by that? Community, by definition, is marked by diversity. So you're in a great organization where you have a privilege of interacting with people that are different than you, that think differently than you. Go out of your way, be intentional about sitting down with those people, especially the folks that think differently than you do, that see things from a different perspective, and see what you can learn. Ask them questions. And just because you're having a conversation with someone that disagrees with you doesn't mean that you have to end up agreeing with them, but it does mean that they have the right to be heard and to be listened to, and give them mutual respect, and think about what you can learn and what it means to them just by listening. And so I want to compliment your organization and your leadership today from what I witnessed earlier this morning. There were lots of issues that all of you are dealing with, and your leaders were standing up here and they were listening. Now, in every instance, they didn't have a solution, but I know from working in other organizations that just to be sure that people are listening goes a long way, right? The fact that they take the time and they listen to your question and they process the question, and even though they may not have an immediate solution, they are listening to what you have to say. And so reciprocate that to those that are around you, especially those that are different than you. Because what ends up happening a lot of times in life and society and culture is we end up hanging out with people that are just like us, that look like us, act like us, think like us. And guess what? If everybody's hanging out with the same people and we're just repeating each other over and over and over again, if you and I agree on everything, one of us is unnecessary. It's redundant, right? So find people in your group that disagree with you and sit down with them and listen to them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but at least listen to what they have to say, because you might learn something. And that's the definition of real community. And finally, this is real simple, right? We should have all learned this in elementary school, but unfortunately many of us haven't, or we've forgotten it. Practice saying, "Hi, my name is Scott." Your name's not Scott, but you would insert your name there, right? "Hi, my name is." Tell me about your dreams. Tell me about your aspirations. Tell me about your goals. How can I help you in achieving those goals? I appreciate the folks that are serving me today as your speaker. All of them have come up to me and said, "What can I do to help you make this presentation better? Is there anything that you need? Is there anything that you desire?" That is what I'm talking about. That is a definition of centered leadership. Practice saying, "Hi, my name is, tell me about your story. How can I assist you in achieving your dreams?" In the final analysis, all of you have the ability to influence. All of you have the ability to inspire. All of you have the ability to encourage those that are around you. How do you do that? You make a decision that in a time and in an era when so many people are fighting over boundaries and fences and walls, instead of building another fence, let me challenge you to dig a well. Stay centered, my friends. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.